Welcome back to
Session.
Hello once again, everybody. I'm way too close to this mic. We are back again with the tentatively titled Session podcast. My name is Koby. It is so good to be with you again. I have the most of special guests, if you put him, in comparison with the guests that I haven't had yet. My friend George Rosatone is here. Applause in the studio.
Hello.
Would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm George Rosatone.
Uh-huh.
I am a friend of Koby's.
It's very polite.
Frequent collaborator of Koby, also on another podcast.
Yep.
So this is a bit surreal.
Yep.
Hearing you do the exact same intro that you do for Sleeper Suplex.
It took me so long to work out the title. I haven't thought of a new cadence yet. I was listening to
Hello, everybody.
It's the intro of a Black Star song. Because you know how that Black Star album, it's like meant to be a show. I think that's the frame. I haven't listened to the whole thing.
So it's doubly unoriginal.
Yes. Well, that's me. It's the definition starts that way. It's hello everybody. Mm-hmm. Now, Black Star is not what we're here to talk about today, though music might come up. My friend, thank you so much for sitting down to do this. George is a very talented, multi-disciplinary artist. He's a writer, he's a photographer, he is a photo editor, he's a video editor, he's a videographer, he's a cinematographer. He does it all, ladies and gentlemen. So I guess my first question to you is, where do you get off? Where do you get off doing all this shit? Sick start, George. So this is fun.
Wait,
we're having fun.
Cut that.
Cut that? We're gonna cut that?
Yeah. In the edit.
Yeah, in the
All
edit.
right.
Yeah.
Where do I get off? What a
It's not it doesn't have to be
insinuating question.
it doesn't have to be a genuine first question.
No. I'm trying to... Can you give me the definition of get off?
So I guess that's actually
Define getting off.
That's a good way to lead. I'm not going to in the way that you seem to want me to. But what I'll say to you is this. When I ask you about how you are multidisciplined and how you find yourself moving in all of these different pools, as it were, what do you think, I guess, the value is in being multidisciplinary? How does it inform each of your creative works to be multidisciplinary? That's not on my sheet. That's just sort of something I was thinking about on the drive down.
It's interesting because you're asking me to give you the value of something that I genuinely don't even feel. Like you say multidisciplinary.
You are.
Discipline is where my brain checks out. Because
Okay.
Because I agree that I do a lot of stuff, but I wouldn't say very much of it is disciplined, or at least it doesn't feel very disciplined.
What about what you do makes you less of a disciplined artist than, who's a disciplined artist to you, and why are they more disciplined? Because when I just mean you act within a certain umbrella.
That's fair. I don't know. I think the fact that I dip my toes in so much stuff is directly countering the idea of discipline, because I've always, one thing, if we're going to get straight into processes and stuff here, one thing that's always, I think, hurt any sort of creative pursuit that I've jumped through is the fact that I have trouble sticking to a certain medium.
Right.
For no particular reason. Sometimes I'm just in the mood to do something visual. Sometimes I'm just in the mood to do something audio. Sometimes I feel more like writing something than I do photographing or filming something. So it bounces around week by week.
Right.
If anything, I wish I had more discipline in multi areas,
Yeah.
because then I would actually finish things more often. But
how important is it to you to be active in all of those disciplines? Because you, as you say, a different week would be a different thing. Like you talk frequently about just there even you talk about, this week I'm doing this. It feels like every week you and I sort of text about stuff, and you'll be like, dude, you got to use GarageBand. I've been making stuff. And I'm like, yeah, sick. And then you're like, next week it's like, I've been working on a Photoshop project. Got to do this. What's the where do you, obviously you're just sort of, I guess the polite term is you're very antsy. You're like, I want to do this. Now I want to do this. Now I want to. You never want to be someone who missed an opportunity to express yourself creatively in all these ways. What is the how important is that to your artistic process, being multifaceted?
yeah, I was gonna say you left out the GarageBand thing. You forgot Sick Beatmaker in your rundown of.
Yeah, sorry. Oh, sorry. Yeah, no,
my
that's
many talents.
that's under a
titles.
coffee smudge. Beatmaker, right? Yeah, right next to Georg interview.
I'm just kidding. Um, I don't know. It's just the ideas for all these different things usually come from whatever I'm consuming at the time. Much like pretty much everything else in life, you are what you eat. And I just happen to eat a lot. So
I like that, yeah.
if I'm watching a lot of movies one week, it's suddenly like, oh, I need to make a film or write a script or something. If I'm reading a lot, it's like, oh my God, I need to write a book. If I'm listening to a lot of music, it's like I need to make music or something
beats.
like that. Yeah, I need to make sick, nasty beats.
Sick beats.
But the issue with that often being is that all these things are interwoven into my life constantly.
Right.
Like I don't use a phone in bed. I wake up, the first thing I do is read. I go to bed, the first thing I do is read. So there's the writing itch right there. In the car, when I'm doing chores, when I'm on a bike ride or something, it's always music. So that's where the music itch comes from. When I'm hanging out with people, it's usually ending up in some sort of movie or screen related thing. So that's where that comes from. So it's just this constant war of like, what do I do? What do I need to do? What do I feel like doing?
Yeah.
And that's kind of it. It's horrible for making money.
Yeah.
I should put that up front.
Yeah.
I am not, quote unquote, successful within the environment we're in any stretch of the means. I mean, I guess, emotionally you could say that it does feel good. So there's some success to be had there.
Right. It's funny because you, when I was doing my, when I was researching George for this podcast, I was listening to a recent episode of Sleeper Suplex we came up, because if you don't know, you should go listen to our other podcast, Sleeper Suplex, where we talk very exclusively about music and the way it makes us feel.
Hence the sick beat making.
So something that we do on that is we obviously, we interview people sometimes too. And one of the people that we had on recently was Meg Hemingway. Go buy her book, Last Prince of Aurora. It is available now. Thank you so much for doing that, Meg. But we spoke on that a little bit about, worshiping art, worshiping it almost at like needing it the way that some people need religion in a way. Have you ever, how do you feel about that? Because I was listening to, again, I was listening to us talk about that a little bit on that podcast, and it seems like you are someone who has very clearly made it a point to have art in your day-to-day life. Do you consider it something that you worship? Do you consider it like, do you consider yourself someone who worships art, or is it something where like that amount of reverence for it, like looking at it like it is some sort of thing that's so above you? Do you consider that, is it harder to make art if you worship it like that?
It's hard to say because I've never been a very religious person.
Right.
So I wouldn't say that I worship it, or if I do, I just never saw it as a sort of worship. My body is just not used to that kind of approach to things.
Right.
But at the same time, I would not be enjoying my time on Earth nearly as much if it weren't for some sort of art in my vicinity, in my sort of presence. And I'm trying to figure out why that is. That's always a constant dilemma of mine. I think it's just the process of human intent. I'm like infinitely fascinated by the idea of human intent, by psychology, how psychology weaves into the pen of creativity. Just why did someone make this? Why did someone think this was cool? Why do I think it's cool? Why do I not think it's cool?
Right.
Why does it make me feel this way? Why does it mean this thing? Just that process of things. I mean, if you think about it too hard, everything's subjective. Arguably, nothing really matters, means anything in the long run. Like everyone who came before us is dead. We'll all be dead.
Yeah.
So like, what did this guy mean when he painted this thing? What does that actually matter too much? But that being said, like that process of figuring it out is what gives me life. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm a retired nihilist. So I used to have these thoughts, especially when I was, like, really younger and edgier. And I kind of went through that fire of, like, well, I'm not religious. I'm not super spiritual. So what do I do? Oh, there's no really good option for me. I'm just kind of, born to eventually die and everything in between. And then that just got old, too. Like, that process of thinking is exhausting. And so I'm like, okay, so what about this is fun? What do I like about all this? And it turns out I'm a very social person, despite being as introverted as I am. I'm
Yeah.
more like psychologically social. I just love seeing why humans do the things that they do. It's almost like a direct antithesis of my former nihilistic thinking. It's like, well, if nothing matters, then why are people putting so much work and creativity into something?
Yeah.
There's got to be some sort of reasoning for that. Even if that person is not alive to tell me their exact reasoning, or they're just not within my connection sphere to be able to talk to me directly, it's like, well, at least I can figure out what I feel about it.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's fascinating. I think we've even spoken about that before. A lot of the art you make, a lot of the drivel that I do, it's very much focused on people and stuff in general, which kind of sounds broad and general to talk about it. But a lot of art isn't about people. A lot of art is about the self. It's about society. It's about some idea that you're reaching for, and it constitutes itself in a story through people. If that makes sense, like someone's trying to fit an analogy into a like period piece, but it's not really concerned with how the people fit into the analogy. It's just concerned about making the analogy work, right?
Right.
But I think you set me up really well there, because one of the questions that I did have written down that I am genuinely interested in, just based on how much I know about you and how you claim to be this antisocial person, yet I have never seen you seriously be antisocial, which is something. But
Well, I'm also an actor. I don't know if you put that on.
oh,
the
right,
list.
right, thespian,
But-
thespian, right. I thought your last name was thespian. No, that makes sense. Regardless of that claim, which we're going to have to fact check, are you more? Would you say you're more intrigued by people, or are you more like scared of them? And which would you say drives creativity more, intrigue or fear?
I think it's always fear.
Yeah,
It's constant fear.
Yeah.
For me, I don't necessarily mean that in a way to like inspire some sort of pity or mystique about
Yeah.
myself. I think it's just generally my mind is programmed to fear the unknown.
yeah,
But at the same time, that's what makes things fun and interesting.
yeah,
Because the known is really boring. Yeah, like I get more enjoyment out of braving into things that I don't understand. Like my favorite art pieces or whatever acts of human intent are always the ones that directly challenge me in some way. Not necessarily in like I want someone to come in and tell me everything I know is wrong and that like they want to squeeze me into a different political belief or something like that, but more so just seeing someone's hand so passionate about one thing challenges my mind to think differently. Because, I mean, at my core, I'm an egotistical being. I think by nature, humans are egotistical beings, whether
Yeah.
we like to admit that or not. So having another egotistical being come in and form something and show you this was worth my time.
yeah.
Not even that it was good,
Yeah.
but this was enough for me to dedicate this certain period of time into me putting my effort into it for no reason other than the fact that it meant something to me mentally or it looks cool.
Yeah.
'Cause that's the most interesting thing about art for me. I mean, it gets a little bit muddier when you start attaching money to it, but at its core, it's like something that doesn't make a ton of sense biologically,
Right.
at least to me.
Yeah.
I've yet to read like a textbook or something that
Oh, yeah.
convinces me otherwise, but you know, what's the process of being alive? Like, what does every animal do? They eat, sleep, have babies, move
Right.
on,
Right.
fight sometimes. Like,
Yeah.
and you know, what would happen if a fox in the middle of the woods just like picked a berry and started painting another fox with it against a
Right.
tree? Like, why would it do that?
Right. I think what's interesting though is that you sort of hit on something. You've hit on something there that I think we've even spoken about. The thing that elevates humans to the higher mammal level, the thing that brings it to that third dimension. We've had this conversation ad nauseum actually, but that idea of like, well, what separated the cavemen from the people, or not the people, the animals around them, the monkeys that couldn't hop out of the tree, is the idea that the humans the cavemen at the time went into caves and started painting. Like, dude, I saw a fucking woolly mammoth today, and me and my buddy chased it off with a spear. Like, that's the separation point, right? It's the want to communicate and talk about something, right? And I think I actually want to know if you agree with this. I'm going to turn this into a question. I have always felt that art and what makes it so cool one of the things that makes it so cool, there's endless reasons to talk about art, hence this podcast, but one of the things that makes art so cool is that it kind of feels like a constant conversation. Like we're always trying to get to the same answer at the end of this dialogue that we have just not quite found yet. But we all feel as though we're all in one big room. Everyone who has tried to make art, who has written, who has painted, who has taken a photo of something and thought this speaks to me, right? Anyone who has found something aesthetically pleasing that they have tried to document, right? We're all standing in this room together. When it comes to talking about art, all of the creatives are in one room together. And when an artist or creative dies, they leave the room. How satisfied they feel with their time in that room, in the conversation, in the dialogue is person to person, right? And I feel what's interesting is that no one's able to stick around for the end of the conversation, but everyone gets a word in and everyone gets to say. Does that make sense?
That's a great way of putting it.
Do you feel satisfied with being a chain in the big link fence that art is? Is that satisfying to you? Or do you want to be the one, right, well, I can already hear it, but do you want to be the one who's like, no, guys, there's actually something on the other side of this chain. I've gotten to it. Do you want to be the one that is able to live forever and like stay in the conversation the whole way? Or do you think that you have like, that you want to be the one that comes up with the answer?
I mean, I don't necessarily want myself to be in the conversation. I don't want to be the messiah that has the answer. I never even want my stuff that I do now to be hugely inspirational for any reason.
Right.
I just kind of enjoy, it just keeps me going. I just enjoy being an ear in the conversation. You know, if we go with this conversation analogy, like you're saying, like if art, you know, quotation, the word art is a lecturer up on this big stage.
Yeah.
I want to be in the crowd whispering to somebody next to me.
Interesting.
And I want that person to constantly be changing. You know what I mean? Like I want it to be a daily lecture hall that I visit and new people are there every single time.
Interesting.
Something like that. Does that make sense?
I think so. I think what I'm hearing, and correct me, please, if you're saying that you want art to be a dialogue that you constantly are finding new accents upon, like a conversation that you're having that the person you're across from is always varying how they respond to your beliefs on it. Is that right?
I mean, we came into this podcast with a list of all the things I do, and jokes aside, there's maybe one or two things on there that I actually identify myself with.
Which ones, actually? Real quick to get it on record, which ones?
Writing, for sure.
Yeah.
And, you know, throw, like, photography and videography on there. I kind of consider those one and the same, just like camera.
Well,
put writing and camera.
we'll move into the rest of your answer, but I want to get it on record. George is being modest. He does all of these things, whether or not he believes that they are worthy of being called art. He does them.
Right.
But go ahead with the rest of your answer.
I mostly just wanted to clear that up because a lot of the other stuff is stuff that I dabble in when I have free time. It's not like, you know, I'm not going to put myself in the same conversation with people that wake up every day and live, breathe, and eat this shit. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just kind of a visitor in some of those other places.
That does make it sound like you are someone who worships it, though, then. That does. Because to me, it sounds like you worship writing and, let me check my notes, quote, camera, end quote. You worship those things so you feel that you can speak on it from a level of, you feel as though you're the lecturer in those halls.
No. I mean, I feel like I'm more qualified.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm in the grad program at least. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
But that's not a statement based on my own assumption of quality. It's just the amount of time I put in.
Okay, I can respect that. Yeah.
I find it way easier. I mean, writing especially, I can do that anywhere with pretty much anything. You know, it can be a really sharp rock in the middle of the woods against soft dirt, or it can be on a laptop with a million notebooks around me.
Mm-hmm.
It's just something I genuinely do every day.
Right.
And, you know, I'm not saying I'm particularly good at it, but...
Everyone else is. He's just not.
But I just feel like that's the one I've engaged with the most,
right.
Partly because it's so easy, too, for me. I just don't carry around enough equipment or have the time to, like, make a movie every day, but I do have the time to write stuff every day. So,
yeah. So these things that you... To bring it back to the first question really quickly, then, to sort of tie off the knot, to talk about how these other things that you dabble in, the GarageBand stuff, and no one's accusing you of being Dr. Dre, obviously. However, the that and the, you know, editing and the cinematography stuff and the trying out all these different avenues, right? You feel that those are things that you dabble in, right? And you are not that as a like occupational thing. That being the case, what is the draw to, use those things? Is it just a new frontier for you? Is it you feel you can express yourself through that and it's an avenue you haven't tried expression through? Like what draws you when you're like, oh, when you're on a whim, basically like, oh, I want to try GarageBand this month. I want to make beats on GarageBand. Good or bad, I want to have something that I've made on GarageBand. What is it, the satisfaction? Is it the expression? What about it?
It's a mix of two things for the most part. The first being just resources.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes it's just easier for me to make my own stuff than it is to hire somebody else at this stage in my career. I just don't have the expenses for it. So, like, if I'm making a podcast or a film or something, or even just a visual to accompany some sort of writing piece, it's just easier for me to go in and try to make my own music. If I ever find myself in a place where I have a bit more of an expendable income, then absolutely going straight to professionals for that. But it's also just, like I said earlier, I engage with so much of this stuff so often because it really is when I feel the best when I'm engaging in art in some way that eventually it just, a bug gets in my brain where I'm like, I wonder what would happen if I did this. Because I have my favorites. Now, I listen to every type of music genre that I can. I'm same with like movies and all that. I try to vary it up as much as possible. But there are sounds and visuals that I definitely gravitate towards the most. So I'm always interested of like, well, what if I tried it? What if like I hear a song and I think, oh, it would be crazy if I chopped this part out and made a sample out of it. So I just do it.
No.
And it never turns out as good as I imagined, but it's fun, the process of doing it. And also, like, to throw in a surprise third reason there that just came to me, it's helps me to better understand what I'm engaging with to an extent. It's like, if I'm listening to music and say it's a very simple song, and I'm like, oh, this is awesome, this is great. I assume it's very simple to make something like this because it doesn't sound that complicated. But then if you sit down and when I try to do the same thing or replicate it, I'm like, oh, wait, this is actually really fucking hard. And it takes decades of like daily discipline and work to go into this. So it makes me feel even better about the art, which is never a bad thing at all. So.
Yeah, no, I get you. I think the idea of art being, if the thesis is art for you is understanding and seeing through other perspectives, I can understand why the doing is such a part of it for you. And that's I like what you've asserted there with regards to not yet being Dr. Dre, but we're working on it.
Yeah. It's part of a longer conversation that has to do with like criticism in general, because art has become such a product now.
Yeah.
Which is a good thing and a bad thing. I won't say it's objectively a bad thing because, the good side of it being a product is that people can buy it and you can live off of it.
God willing.
Which is great.
Yeah.
But, that also comes with the, in my opinion, fair result of criticism. If you're going to ask people to invest time and money into something, then it's only fair that people have opinions on whether or not you should invest your time or money into something.
100%.
So, but at the same time, it's always been strange for me to be critical of something without understanding the process that goes into it.
No.
Because when I was younger, I could just be in love with or in hatred with whatever I wanted to. But now that I'm getting older and putting myself into these situations more, I start to understand. Like, I could shit on a movie for cutting corners in some areas and like, oh, this story is unfinished or whatever, this character isn't fully fleshed out. But now I know that it's like, yeah, you're juggling hundreds of people and your own life problems and all this expenses, shit, copyright, licensing, props, equipment, like staff, like, it's gives me a better appreciation for the process of things, which I think excuses some of the shortcomings we see sometimes.
Yeah. I think you and I have actually come to this agreement, but this is another thing that I kind of want to put on record and put out into the world. I think the worst thing that you can say about a piece of poetry, a piece of art, in physical art, in any event, right, whatever it is, the worst thing that can be said about it is nothing, I think.
Yeah.
Because if the point of art, if the point of creation is, hey, this is something that I feel deep down inside of me, naturally, what you're doing there is you are putting something very personal and therefore very individual out into an environment with a multitude of people, however many, 2, 3, 4, your parents, your entire families, a room full of people at a writing club, whatever it is, right? In doing so, you're opening yourself up to being commented upon. So if someone has nothing to say, then it means that for one reason or another, not even because your art piece is bad, just because they have nothing to say, like, to me, it says, okay, I feel maybe not disrespected, but I feel you didn't engage with it in any way that would make for this to be a useful piece of either of our time, right? There's a YouTube video I watched once, and I'll send it to you actually. I think you'd really enjoy it. There's a video where this person talks about what makes something about basically the definition of art, more or less, where they're talking about, this is not what this podcast is going to devolve into. It is a profile about you. I just have to say this. This person talks about a woman who took a bunch of photos of herself, of the world around her, of buildings, of cityscapes, whatever, and they're really gorgeous. I don't remember her name off the top of my head, but basically she took all these Polaroids, and at the time she wasn't really looking to do anything with them. She literally did it just for herself, which is a whole conversation. Why would you do something just for yourself? Because this isn't like, she isn't like doing this on social media. She's not videotaping a concert. She has to develop, take the photos, buy the film, develop the film, have a dark room for it, all this stuff. She puts it in a shoebox, like in an attic somewhere, and then decades later, she's passed away. I don't remember from what, but I think she died premature. And someone finds the pictures and like puts them like either, I think, online, and then they get picked up by a magazine or something, and she becomes a famous photographer. She didn't do it to become a photographer. So when did she become a photographer? What point along her journey did it stop being photos she's taken for herself and art? Where did it happen? And this YouTuber posits what makes it art from hobby, or hobby from art, or whatever, in some way. And I don't want to butcher this person's point, so I'm not going to make bold accusations. I don't fully remember what the thesis statement is, but I remember specifically they're talking about a critical piece of art is the engagement with others, right? The artistic moment. I saw Guernica by I think that's Dali. I think Guernica is Dali, right? Guernica is very visceral. If I had never seen Guernica, I would have never known Guernica was art. I would have never known the intended artistic effect. The artistic moment is the phrase that this YouTuber uses, right? So I think it's interesting when you talk about how important critical analysis is. When I'm reading shit back on the stuff that I post in our writing club that we're a part of together, when I read stuff back, I'm like, are you critiquing me? Am I worth your time? Do you respect me as a writer, right? Enough to say that. You know what I mean? We're saying the same thing. I'm just doing it in a much more long-winded and indelicate way.
No, it's delicate.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's very delicate.
Yeah. And I guess at the end of all that, I'm going to ask you a question. Speaking of critique and opinion and stuff, how often do you let external forces and opinion affect your creation process and your ego?
110% of the time, probably.
Okay.
It's interesting, the photographer story that you had, because I feel as though I'm the exact opposite.
Interesting.
Which is a really weird and tough pill to swallow, because it's, on one hand, it sounds like the most egotistical thing in the world. Like, I can't, well, it's not that I can't, but I struggle to create things without at least imagining someone else stumbling upon it. Even when I'm journaling for myself and I know I'm not going to submit this anywhere, no one's going to see this ever, there's still some voice in the back of my head that's thinking, okay, so when I die and someone finds this book in a box in an attic somewhere, how are they going to interpret these words? And that does affect how I write things, and it's something I've tried to shut out completely. It's something I've embraced fully, and both sides of that coin are equally bad in my experience. But I'm starting to learn to accept it in a way. I think that for me, the idea of investing a lot of myself into a creative pursuit that nobody's going to interact with or see is almost impossible, because for me, that's where the enjoyment of it comes from. I mean, I could do that, but I wouldn't have fun doing it. And the whole point is to have fun. And it's not that I want necessarily the praise. It's that, like I said earlier, the thing that makes this all enjoyable for me is discussing the human intent. I love nothing more than when I share a photo or write something and I get to hear multiple people's interpretation of it, good or bad. I've had people read my stuff and tell me that they think it's an allegory for this thing that I've never even heard of, or like it's a religious reference to something I'm completely unfamiliar with, or I've had people nail it on the head and they know exactly what I'm thinking. It's like they can read my mind and they can tell how I'm feeling right now. Both of those experiences and everything in between is what hypes me up to even do it in the first place. It's why it's enjoyable. It's interesting because I've sat down with myself in dark times and been like, is this an ego thing? Is this like, am I secretly to even myself so self-absorbed that like other people telling me about my work is the best thing that happens to me and like the main motivation behind doing anything? And to an extent, yeah, but I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing. I mean, I'm not looking for my ego to be stroked. I just think that the exponentially infinite variation of human brains is interesting.
Yeah.
I just want to hear like, even if you don't like it, just tell me why.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to take it personally, but I just want to know why, because it's just another factor to consider.
Yeah.
And that might affect what I do next.
Right.
I'm not going to go home and cry about it, but I might go home and be like, interesting, this person hated it because it reminded them of this thing, or it made them feel this way, or they thought I meant this thing.
Yeah.
So how can I play with that? How can I set up that expectation next time?
Right.
Sort of thing.
But the comments and critiques, I mean, less so when you're gone and not able to receive the criticism, as you said, but like the criticism that you get from like your peers and stuff that you hear while you're in the process of making, like, oh, you should change this, oh, I wouldn't have done that. You know, we all have people in our lives who critique all sorts of our stuff that we do. But I mean, you are never, in your own mind, I can tell you from my perception what my answer to this for you would be, but in your own mind, are you ever swayed from your, like, how can I explain this? Are you ever swayed from what you're trying to do by a critique or by a comment or by a perception? Are you like, is there ever a glimmer of like a critique you got that is like, oh, maybe I should change course, or a like a worry that it's like, are people going to judge me if I go down this path?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah?
That's a big one. That's a big one for sure.
The worry?
Yeah, because I think, especially for writing,
Yeah.
A big thing of what I like to do, a big part of my process, rather, is, carrying along the psychological theme. I should have been a psychology student. Oh my God, I would have loved it.
You would have had some answers to some questions you got about yourself, for sure.
And I'd probably have a nice job too.
You absolutely. Oh my God.
Maybe. I actually have no idea how that
No,
field is. I don't know if it's better or worse than the English degree field.
It's definitely better than you'd be getting paid.
Yeah, but no, I would love to read more into actual psychology instead of my pseudo psychology. But I think when it comes to my writing style, one of my favorite things to do is take a mentality that I'm unfamiliar with and use that to build a character.
Okay.
A lot of my stories are based around people,
Mhm.
and a lot of those people are freaks or weirdos or like just outcasts in general. And I love stories where my perspective is challenged in that way. Like, I don't necessarily always love my main character to be a hero. I don't want to agree with everything the narrator says. I don't always want a happy ending. I don't want my characters to feel safe. Sometimes I do. Sometimes it works amazingly. And some of the most therapeutic stories I've ever read are the ones that are everything falls perfectly into place and just makes you feel better about being alive in general. But in terms of my style, I love unpredictability. I love things that are foreign to the human mind, or at least our sense of security. But I do very, very often censor or stop myself because of the misinterpretation of like, okay, I am entering this headspace for the sake of this story or character, but it's still me writing it. So like, I can't go to an extreme.
Yeah.
Because it's still my pen.
Yeah.
And not necessarily that I would want to go to an extreme, because I'm also worried about that sometimes. It's like, if I dive into this thing I'm interested in too much, how much of it is going to genuinely put me in a dark enough place where I'm just not happy with myself, Right. Like, I could want to write about serial killer or something. Like that could be the next protagonist for one of my books. But like, do I really want to enter the headspace of a serial killer? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
even for the sake of a story. And
Yeah.
do I want other people reading a book with my name on it that has to do with someone like that? You know, just for an example. But that mentality has been a struggle.
How do you combat that? Because you always come through with these pieces that are very clearly you and very clearly come from a specific place, and they're well thought out and they're well done and all of that. Like, but you say you operate with this immense worry. How do you stay the course on your creative process with that level of worry? Is it just reassurances you tell yourself? Is it the knowledge that you've done well before, so you should trust your instinct? Do you trust your instincts?
I mean, a part of it is the privilege that I have where not a lot of people know who I am or read my stuff. So my audience is very small. I used to want to be famous so bad. If you asked me this question in college, I would have told you that, I'll just graduate and then put all my effort into selling out 1 million copies and getting famous and everyone loves me and all that bullshit. But the more I've seen the internet grow, the more I've seen society evolve, sort of scares me how many people there are now and how many of them have a voice.
Yeah.
I mean, it's great for some reasons, but for other reasons, it's like no matter what you do, people are going to interpret it however they want.
Yeah.
And, herd mentality is such a big thing now in every spectrum of every opinion.
Right.
Like literally anything you could ever think about anything, there's at least 100 people out there that also think the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that worries me if I were to write something and put it out there and just seeing 1 million people say this thing and then 1 million people say this thing and 1 million people say this thing. Half of them didn't even read it. You know what I mean? Like that's a freaky thought. But the way that I sort of combat that for now, since I don't have to worry about that, is when I write things, I try to keep them in a gray area. I don't want to ever, even through characters, I don't ever want to preach anything directly, because I do understand how a lot of minds, especially younger minds, are susceptible to influence. And you can put like an R rating or an 18 plus on a book or a movie or whatever, but some kid's still going to find it somehow, no matter how sheltered they are.
Mm-hmm.
And so I never want my story or my characters to preach bluntly the thing I'm trying to explore if it's something dark like that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So when I'm writing it, we'll use the serial killer example again, right? If I want to write a character who kills people, I'm not going to make it sound like the most appealing, fun, easy thing in the world.
Yeah.
Even if it's from like a first person perspective and he fucking loves it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
like, I'm not going to make it that.
No.
For a more, I don't know, illustrated way of putting it, it's like a lot of my writing involves the feeling of being human. Like I tend to mention every physical thing that comes with every action, which will probably hurt me in the long run, but in terms of word count. But I do like, if someone's gonna, I write a lot of fantasy, right? So if someone's a knight and they're a soldier and they're out doing knight soldiery things, then I'm gonna mention how his muscles are sore. I'm gonna mention how he probably has a fever. He's been walking around in a metal suit in the sun all day with horrible hygiene and shit. Like, no matter how cool or how depraved what they're doing is, they still have to deal with the consequences of being human.
Yeah.
And I never want the reader to forget that. So it's like, even if you're gonna, for whatever reason, find some sort of attachment or inspiration to whatever this person's doing, like, I'm not gonna let you forget that these are the consequences of it.
Right.
Even if the story is, like, in support of that dark character or whatever. Does that make any sense at all?
Yeah. No, I think so. I think I think I see what you're saying. You don't like hitting people over the head with something, but you do like being like practical. You like being pragmatic about it and stuff. And I think that it does kind of elucidate a little bit of a point there where at the very end you say over and over again, like, everything you do is consequences, good and bad. And I think that gray area is a place that you really thrive in and stuff. And I don't... We spoke earlier about if you're more intrigued by people or scared of them. And I think you have really painted a picture of yourself as an artist who is very much interested in how you would react in situations when you're making something, and then after the something has been made, you're fascinated by the way in which someone's going to respond to it, because it answers a question about them for you. And I wonder too, because another thing that I'm curious about is, like, we basically already have answered it, but I have written down here, like, what is the purpose of the art you make? Are you after an understanding of yourself and other people, or are you just after the satisfaction of giving someone up something you dreamed up that you think speaks to you and seeing how they respond to it? Like, what, like, if you had to, and I know that art is very difficult to sort of wrap in a box like that, but what is that purpose for you? Like, where does it lie?
It's closer to the first thing you said, like getting a better understanding of myself and other people. But I'm never confident enough, or I never feel like I reached the point where I fully understand the thing that I'm after.
Mm-hmm.
It's more so just that I want to explore it and get accustomed enough to the feeling to the point where I can have an actual detailed discussion about it afterwards. And that's what a lot of my pieces are, like the photograph series I do or the writings I do. Like, it's never just one simple straight thing.
Mm-hmm.
I always do things in bursts. Like, if I'm writing, I write chapters at a time or short stories at a time. If I'm doing photographs, it's never just like one photo of one person and moving on. It's like, no, we're hitting a few different angles here and we're trying a few different things. And that's because I want to really just like immerse myself in whatever I'm trying to figure out for the time being. And I never fully understand it, and I never want to. But yeah, so usually the ideas stem from, okay, there's a trend I'm noticing in my life where I act this way and I'm not happy with it. Or I act this way and I have no idea where it came from or what types of situations inspire me to act this way. Or there's a person in my life who makes me really fucking happy and I don't know why. So I try to emulate that in art to figure out more clues as to why. Or there's a person that I'm horrified of for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And I take that personality and, say in like a story, I throw it in a situation where another personality's in there. And maybe that personality's closer to my own. So it's like, okay, what would happen when these two clash? Like, if I make them argue, how does it sound? If I make them fall in love, how does it sound?
Yeah.
And then I never walk away with a straight answer, and I never expect the characters I write, because they're never one-to-one with real people, but I never expect to leave it with a game plan. It's more so just I feel more comfortable after having been here for so long.
Yeah.
You know, it's like if I were afraid of snakes, as much as I would hate it and fight, I think the most beneficial thing for me would be to jump in a bathtub full of snakes and sit there for 20 minutes and then hop out. Like, I'm not going to come out, you know, miraculously cured of my fear of snakes, but now it's like, well, I know what it feels like and I know what to expect.
Yeah.
So,
You're the type to put pressure on the cut.
Absolutely.
To feel the pain of the cut so you can understand it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and the same applies to things I love and hate about being alive. I just want to experience it more.
Yeah.
So,
I thought of this the other day. So, like, sometimes I hear people talk about the ability to paint, the ability to write, the ability to sing, the ability to play an instrument, all these artistic things. I hear them call them like gifts and stuff, or like, and I've always objected to that, because I feel as though when you're talking about something like that, you almost you take away the work that's involved in getting good at those things, right? It's like, oh, someone thinks that I'm a good writer the same way that someone thinks this guy at a party can do card tricks, right? Like it's sleight of hand. It's small. So, and I'm going to ask you this because I've just had this conversation with myself, obviously. Would you consider creativity a gift, or would you consider creativity like a talent, or like?
it's tough.
Yeah.
I feel like I answer every single one of your questions with a
No, it's good.
a gray area.
No, it's good. It
But,
means that they're. I take it as a compliment.
Yeah. For context, we're both caffeinated now, by the way. We took a short coffee break, so
I've been awake since 5 this morning.
answers withheld. But
This is getting cut too.
Is it the coffee break part?
No, not the coffee break part, but keep going.
Yeah.
I'll decide later in the edit.
It's tough. I know I've answered every single one of your
Oh, that's good.
questions with a gray area so far, but I mean, me personally speaking, I'm not very religious, so I've never looked at my ability as a gift from a higher being. If so, then I would expect it to be more profitable in the short term for now.
Yeah, well.
But at the same time, I do think that for whatever reason, and I can't give you a specific example pertaining to myself, it's just too complicated. I haven't dove into it too much. But I do think that people gravitate towards certain mediums based on just some sort of ancestral genetic experience for whatever reason. Does that make sense? Like, I'm unfamiliar with a lot of my ancestral history, but I firmly believe that the reason why I gravitate more towards words and the reason why I feel the way that I do about that stuff and camera, quote unquote, is based on something that some ancestors did at some point in history. It's just how my genetic makeup has evolved. That's just where my interests are. That's what clicks. That's where the dopamine pops off. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's interesting. I think I wonder about that.
That being said, real quick, when it comes to talent, I do also firmly believe that anybody can do anything if they're willing to put in enough work for it. And work doesn't have to necessarily translate to quality, just in terms of intent. You know, you can, if you want to make music, anybody can, and it can be the worst song you've ever heard, but if they pour a lot of intent into it, that makes it awesome to me.
Okay.
You know?
I can respect that.
It's the most hippie take I have, but
no, I can respect that. I can respect that. It's like how one of Kurt Cobain's favorite albums was that album that dad made his like daughters make, and it's atonal and like awful, but it's like a cult classic now.
Exactly.
Like I can respect that. That's outsider art. It's like I don't know if we've ever really spoken about it, but like Daniel Johnston. Daniel Johnston was an outsider artist, and like you listen to his stuff, and it's not cosmetically appealing, but I'll tell you what, every time Funeral Home comes on in my car, I scream that shit right along with him. He like has that's sidebar, that album, or not that album, that song is so funny because it's a live performance that makes it to the album cut, and you can hear him be like, everybody, and like the repeated phrases, he just says, he sings funeral home over and over again, and he keeps trying to get people to join in, and they start joining in, but they never fully grab him, and so he's like, in between verses, he's like, once more with feeling, you're all gonna die every day. Tons of people die, and you will too. Funeral home. It's so crazy, that performance. He's oh man, rest in peace to him. He was an unbelievable soul. But even Daniel Johnston, right? The thing that kind of gave him his spark. Not that he couldn't have been a great artist without this, but the reason that Daniel Johnston has the quality that he has is because of in some ways, it's because of the issues that he had with his mental health. Not necessarily his schizophrenia, but he had all these like issues reaching out and talking to people, and that desire to connect with people was fueled by his making art. They worked in tandem with each other. It was a dance. Like, he wanted to understand people, so he made art, and he wanted to make art so he could make people understand him, right? So I think what I'm saying is, I agree everyone can make something, and it's in the eye of the beholder once it's made and stuff, and I think that there's a beauty in that of itself. However, I do think, and I don't know where this comes from, so I'm curious about your thoughts on this too. I do think that there are certain factors that make you more receptive to creativity, that make you more wanting to use creativity, because a lot of people have issues or stuff they want to say, but a lot of those people don't use artistic mediums. You know what I mean? Like, not everyone's into writing. Not everyone's into taking photos. You know what I mean?
The same thing I said about myself, I think applies to everybody, be it consumer, producer, anything. And that's my belief. That's what I carry with me. But same thing. I think that for whatever reason, you like the things you like because of your genetic makeup. You make the things you make because of something that happened to something somewhere, whether to you directly or something generations before you. It's just, and that's what the seed of all my interest in human intent is like, you know, a lot of factors go into that.
Yeah.
And it's the same concept. So
Well, let me ask you: Does art have to have meaning for it to be good?
no.
No.
Well, when you say meaning, do you mean artist intent? Because meaning could be, the artist made it and didn't mean anything, but I could find meaning in it.
Well, let's say both. Let's say. I mean, I think we've sort of covered the latter, where like if the person who sees it doesn't consider it art, then it's not to them art, because perception's reality. But if the artistic intent doesn't have like a specific meaning, is it no longer art?
No, I don't think so.
No?
I mean, you're looking at, and you are yourself someone who has been through countless English literary courses, and what do they train you to do? They train you to look at a page of words or a painting of something and tell you, hey, come back in a week with 6 pages about an argument that you just made up defending something that you interpreted from this.
Yeah.
And I carry that with me to everything in life. The way the lighting in this room is hitting your coffee cup right now could be a metaphor for your spiritual attachment to caffeine or something
It certainly is. I think you're on the money with that.
Give me an hour and I can write 6 pages about something that has to do with the most unintentional random placement of objects in this room.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just what it is. So if you're asking me personally, can there be art without meaning? And to me,
No.
everything can be bullshit.
Yeah.
You can bullshit a meaning out of everything.
Well, yeah. As a creator, as someone who writes, who cameras, which is more important to you as a creative? Is it what you meant or what someone takes from it?
What someone takes from it.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I think what I meant is the driving force that causes me to do it, but then someone, like, hearing what people take from it is the reward that I get from finishing it.
How often do you hear wrong interpretations of your art?
Constantly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I love it.
You do?
It's the best part for me.
Yeah.
Because it's like, I'm talking a lot about my pseudo beliefs here.
No,
but,
I mean, that's what it's about.
I also believe that none of us are ever fully capable of understanding ourselves.
Ever.
I think there's a hard wall within the human brain where it just doesn't allow yourself to fully know the workings of yourself.
Right.
It's like that autopilot stuff. I wish I had the scientific words to talk about it directly, but it's like the concept of like, anyone can bite off their own finger, but the brain stops them from doing it or whatever that thing is. I think to an extent, the brain stops you from realizing exactly how you function. You might know it really well. You can pick up on patterns. You can force yourself into patterns where your habits become predictable and you can control your inner chemicals. But to a certain extent, it's a very wide spectrum, but to a certain extent, the brain never fully lets you 100% get it. And so hearing other people interpret things about you, you can listen to that, or about your work rather, you can listen to that and take from it what you will and see if you identify with it or not.
Yeah.
And if you don't, it's up to you. You could ignore it. You could say, oh, that's interesting. Or you could ingest it and be like, oh, did I mean that?
Right.
I did use this same word 15 times this one page.
Without even meaning to.
Why is my brain attached to that? Where did that come from? Oh, this is my 3rd story in a row where this happens. Why did that keep popping up in my subconscious? It's almost like dream interpretation, but it's a dream that you crafted.
Okay. I like that.
And I get I never get the same feeling of magic from my own writing as I do from ingesting other stuff.
Yeah, no, I get that.
Because obviously I was there for every detail of everything. I typed every letter onto the page.
Oh, yeah.
So a bit of the mystique is gone. Like when I leave something up for interpretation, I know I'm leaving it up for interpretation as opposed to being forced into a position.
Yeah.
And so something interesting I found is when you go back to reading stuff that you haven't looked at in a long time, even if it's your own stuff, sometimes you get this experience where you're almost accidentally psychoanalyzing yourself. It's like the stuff I said. Why is this word popping up so much? Why is this written the way it is? And it's interesting.
I enjoy one of the things that I really find intriguing, and I will never reveal how much of it is so, because I think the goal of creation is, I think one of the things about creation that is so profound on an egotistical level, if I may be so bold, is the implication that something so interesting or beautiful or visceral or something that moved someone without touching them, without being in the room talking to them, without showing them physically something that would do that, right? Being able to do that with your piece, right? On an egotistical level, one of the coolest things is when someone says, "Oh, I found this piece evocative of this emotion. You must have intended that." And sometimes an indeterminate amount of or relating to greater than 33%, lesser than 99% of the time, that is intentional, right? But there is a window of it where someone is taking something and they're like, "Oh, this is so cool. Did you mean this?" And you just go, "Well, was that what you took from it?" And yeah, and because perception is reality, yeah, that's what I meant, right? And in that way, I do believe in death of the author, right? However, I can't help but think, and I'm curious what your stance on this is too, actually. I can't help but think, while reading other people's writings, do you ever feel that they are writing with more intention than you? Do you feel that everything is intentional except for your own work that people are, warping in their own ways, however much of it that is?
More intentional than me?
Yeah, as in, like, I want to know basically if you're like me. Like, I'll read other people's stuff and I'll be like, "Whoa, that's beautiful. That's so beautiful." And then, to have someone say to you, "Oh yeah," or not that they ever would, but then, like, I have to imagine it happens for other people too, where people will be like, "Oh, this was really cool," and I'll be like, "Thank you, I just thought it was cool," and then they'll give a reason, and I'll be like, "Oh yeah, that's totally what I intended," and it's not, right? And that happens sometimes.
I mean, at the risk of sounding ridiculously pretentious, everything I do is super intentional.
Okay.
But sometimes it's intentionally obscure.
Okay.
So it's like, because I'm just an overthink. I mean, I do base a lot of my events, and especially photography, like cameras, a lot different because to me, camera is the process of capturing thing in real life.
We have to stop calling it camera because it's really bothering.
Well, I said one or two things, and I can't backtrack it to three.
Can we please
photography and videography?
Can we please just call it photography or something? Because calling it camera is hurting my brain.
Camera's funny. I like camera.
Whatever, bro.
It's like you're operating a big mechanical eyeball. It's sick.
Yeah, this interview's called "An Hour and a Half with a Lunk."
But the fuck was I saying?
You were talking about intention within your own work.
Yes. Okay. Intention. I mean, a lot of my inspiration does come from things just being cool.
Yeah.
Like things are just cool.
Yeah.
But
same.
then I'm the type of person. It takes me so long to write stuff because I'm the type of person where when I start to write something, I'm like, okay, this needs an intention before I commit myself to it. Like, I'm trying to think of an example for you. I have a story. I have a fantasy story about a couple that's living on a beach and a giant Lovecraftian whale monster thing washes up dead on the beach. Now, that image came to me because one day I thought about it and it was cool. And it was like, that's nuts. And I probably saw a picture of a beached whale somewhere, or I just read something or saw something in a video game. And
it's gnarly,
like,
isn't it?
That's cool.
It's gnarly.
And then when I start to write about it, it's like, well, if I'm going to write about it, if my characters are going to interpret it, it needs to be more than just cool.
Yeah.
So now I start coming up with reasons for it. It's like, okay, what does this represent? What does it mean? What is it allegorical to? And sometimes that's the hardest part. But everything I do is with intention. And that doesn't mean that I want my intention to be what people take away from it. I'm still interested in hearing other people's interpretation. But for me, every single word I put down, every adjective I choose, everything that happens, it's never just there for the sake of being there. It's always for a reason in my head. And my biggest motivator is for other people to pick apart that reasoning.
Right. So, again, we're kind of dancing around the term. I mentioned it earlier. We're dancing around the term, but we're talking about death of the author here, more or less, where once ironically, I learned about this in the class where George and I met, or really started being friends, I'll say. I believe it was Sharon Paradiso. It was Lit Crit, but the term death of the author, in my recollection, and George, you were there, so you can correct me, it's the idea that once something is written, The author no longer exists within the text. It doesn't really matter what their intention was. What matters is how it's taken and what schools of thought move out from it. I've always thought that was. I've actually gone through several fields of thought with this, and I'm curious, and I'm curious, and I want to get to your answer on this too. But I feel as though, in some ways, it is anti-art to let the masses decide what an artist meant. But I also feel like it's anti-art to reserve one specific take on art that is given by one set of eyes. You know what I mean? So I guess my question to you is, at what point has the artistic meaning gotten so far removed as to be like a different piece of art? Like, how do you feel about Death of the Author, first of all? But also, if I'm trying to think of a more succinct way to put this, but it's like, at what point does it really does it unnerve you, I guess, first of all, the idea of, I mean, I don't think it does based on what you've said, but the idea of artistic distillation through, several rounds of eyes, right? At what point does it start to become like a mutation in a way? You know what I mean? I know that's not a very succinct way to ask that. Right. It's just, you get what I'm saying, though.
I mean, and stop me if this is not answering your question correctly, but obviously anything that I make, I want my name attached to it.
Sure.
So, and I want that applied to every artist who creates anything. I do think that there's a lot of value in knowing who made this, when they made it, and sometimes to an extent why they made it.
Yeah.
But that doesn't necessarily create an exclusive interpretation in my mind. Sometimes it's just interesting. I do think that artists need to be considered less as declarers, messiahs, even though I used this analogy before, but less of like professional lecturers. Like, they're not telling you what you should see and believe and hear. I think we should see them more as curators.
Yeah.
Where it's like, I organize these elements in this way. Do with it what you will. And we should still credit them for putting in the work to form things in the way that they form things. But what we take from it is what we take from it. And that's the fun of it. I think it's honestly, like, even trying to find like a definitive definition of any of this stuff, I think is human error to an extent, because it's like, what's the fun in that? The whole point and where all this stemmed from is things that look pretty, things that sound good, things that make you feel in a way that's entertaining enough to not think about the fact that you're going to die one day, or the fact that you have to eat 3 meals a day and sleep and all that. It's just, at the end of the day, it's all stimulation. Yeah. And stimulation's not a bad thing, and that's not to belittle things, but stimulation's a necessary part of life. But finding ways to categorize it and separate, like, oh, well, this is this term and that term and all this, is like, it's just distracting from the point of like, do you like this? Why do you like it? Oh, this person made it. Why did they make it? Cool. That's not how I feel, but I'm glad that they put in the work that we can have this discussion right now and not think about the things that we typically think about. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, something that always interests me is like the authors and artists who curate things that are weird and provocative, but not because that they themselves are weird or provocative or trying to explore. Like, I talked about this with me earlier, something I'm very nervous about. Like, take like a book like, I read this one book by Ryu Murakami recently. It's called Piercing. Yeah. It's a book about a businessman in Japan who has a wife and baby. And one day he's just looking at his baby and he just has the urge to stab it to death. Yeah. And the whole book is about that. And I'm like, that is depraved. That is fucked up. And the book continues with that concept. And I'm like, this is so fucking weird. And I can't even imagine being in any of the positions of any of the characters in this book, or being in the headspace as the author to write a book from the first person perspective of a character who wants to do that. But this is a fun thing to talk about, because it's just like, Like the reaction on your face when I said that is like, whoa, you know,
Yeah.
like why is this happening? Why are we talking about this? Why are we doing this? And it's a lot more interesting to have this sort of discussion in terms of art than it does in terms of like real world news.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like if I were to see the exact same situation happen on a news screen or a Twitter feed, I would not care. That's
No.
just me personally. I don't care what the person's intentions were. If the act is like depraved or dark enough, it's like it doesn't matter to me.
Yeah. You're
Like,
you're a fucked up person.
as
Doesn't
soon
matter.
as another soul is being harmed in the process, it's your intentions don't matter. It wasn't worth it.
Yeah.
Another soul was harmed. It doesn't matter if you thought you were going to become Jesus if you killed this baby or something, or
Yeah.
like, it doesn't matter. Someone else was hurt.
Yeah.
But in terms of exploration of a concept, you know, like a dive into a fictional psychology, that stuff is always interesting, whether the author meant it a certain way or not.
There's a quote I heard once. I don't remember who by, but I want to get your take on it, because I think that a lot of the time I worry sometimes that people are getting to a point where they want to engage with art in a very shallow way. You know what I mean? This idea of consuming the most art and not the art that speaks to you, right? There's a William Burroughs quote, separate from the one I was just about to mention, where he talks about the money machine, and he talks about how the money machine eats youth, and it eats, health and happiness and laughter, and it just shits out stuff, right? Like it eats quality and it shits quantity. That's the money machine. That's Burroughs' take on trying to like make everything about money, right? But the quote that I was thinking about in addition to that is, good art should comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable. And I don't remember who said it, but how do you feel about art used in that way, where people find themselves in art and engage with it, and it brings them peace, or it makes someone in certain perspectives, or it puts someone who is of a certain ilk in a position where they have to question themselves? You know what I mean? Art that makes you like comfortable or question yourself. You know what I mean? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, it differs for everybody.
Well, yeah.
But in my experience, it's just as useful as a tool as everyday life stuff is. Like, I can easily build myself a habit where I do the same things every day, and it's effective, and I'm making money, and I'm alive, healthy,
Right.
etc. But that's sort of just a state of sedation after a while. It's kind of just you're doing well, but you're just going through the motions without necessarily feeling especially thrilled about it. Whereas expression art sometimes has the ability to like rewire that state of sedation into a way that's more thrilling, because there's really nothing you can do about it. You can't stop time. And I don't mean for it to sound so nihilistic, pessimistic, whatever you want to call it, but it's just like we're here and we're getting older, and there's not really anything we can do about it. You know, we can build our lives in a way where we just let it happen and let it happen well, or we can do the exact same thing through means that are just interesting for whatever reason. Just variety. It's the spice of life for a reason. And I like spicy food. I want to throw variety on everything. Right. You know what I mean? I can read 4 books that all tell me the same thing, but if they just say it in interesting and vivid and intriguing enough ways, then that's a good fucking day for me. You know what I mean? I don't know if that answers your question. But
No, I think it does.
It's like I've been dabbling more into spiritual reading because I've never really attached myself to, again, a religion. But it's interesting to see how people word and form these things in a way that makes it easily digestible for the human brain. And in a way, it's a lot of comfort in those things. Like, despite not identifying with particular religions, I think the stories that come with those religions are great.
Yeah.
In a lot of cases. You know, like a lot of the stories that come from the Bible are fucking awesome stories.
Oh, yeah.
great metaphors,
Beautiful.
great symbolism.
It's beautiful poetry.
Yeah, some of it's just fucking rad too, like just a bush being on fire, like whew.
A big ass snake that has to fight an angel at the end of the world.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
entire world flooding, and
Oh yeah,
every single animal fitting on a boat.
like a 900-year-old dude with every animal, two of
Yeah.
them on the planet on a boat.
Dude, even the Greek stuff, like fucking giant gods of elements eating their own kids and
Oh, yeah.
fucking sending spiritual beasts down to like destroy empires. Like,
Oh yeah,
shit's awesome.
it is sick.
And yeah,
Yeah.
like, it's just sometimes it's the same exact teaching.
No,
It's fucking be nice to people, love thy neighbor,
yeah.
don't get tattoos, etc.
Shit.
I know, right?
Shit.
But that is the art. That's the art, is making it fun and cool. Because when it's fun and cool, it's extra stimulating, and when it's extra stimulating, it forces you to believe in it more.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with allowing that to influence your day-to-day life.
Mhm.
Like, it starts to get muddy. And part of the reason why I've avoided these types of things for so long is because of the ideas of like guilt and fear that come with a lot of them. Like, don't do certain things because of the punishment associated with it further down the line. Whereas for me, I find that things are a lot more effective, and I'm encouraged to do them more if they're attached to a lesson or story that has to do with someone overcoming a great obstacle, an
Yeah.
impossible odd. Like
Yeah.
a David and Goliath type thing. Like, I love those types of stories because it's, will I ever fight a 400-foot tall giant? No. But one day I might end up with a really horrible disease, and that might be my Goliath. And having stories and even visuals, paintings, interpretations of these things to look at and to remind myself of the messages behind them are the things that help me better go through the things I'm going through.
Right. Right. No, I think you're onto something there. I think for the entirety of like creation that I can understand, right? It's like we've always been trying to explain something that we are having difficulty comprehending in ourselves. It is why the idea of myth, right, and gods, plural gods, sort of died out once we were able to once we started having, I don't even know how to explain it because they had a scientific understanding relatively back then, but it's almost like once the more banal shit, I don't know if I'm using that word right, the more like shit, like everyday stuff that you see in your life, the sun rising and setting, the wind, thunder. Once we started to understand those sorts of things, we almost started to see the world differently. And at that point, art was always about a bunch of things, but it's almost like the understanding turned inward for some people. Like, it was no longer what does Hades say about the pomegranate. It was, what does it mean to me when Hades lets Orpheus and Eurydice leave because the song was so beautiful? Like, those two aspects existed at the same time, but we no longer talk about. When I was younger, people used to say that thunder was God bowling in heaven.
Yeah.
And now I know what thunder is, but more interestingly to me now, how does thunder make all of my friends feel? Because I have friends who love it. I have friends who are terrified of it,
Exactly.
right? And the human emotional aspect, the extra layer, the new dimension is where art has gone. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's like a third step in this thing where, like, the first thing you learn, especially as a kid, is, God is bowling.
Yeah.
It's like a very lighthearted interpretation of what's going on that the brain can understand and just give an answer to.
No.
It's just, if you think about it too hard, it doesn't really make sense. Why bowling? Bowling sucks. I don't know why God would do it.
Bowling rocks, but whatever. We're not going to get into that.
No, I mean, that's an activity for hell, less for heaven.
It's not that
But-
podcast. We're not going to get into a fight right now.
But you go from these things where it starts a story, then the next step is understanding it,
Mm.
and then the step after that is, okay, we understand it. now why do we feel the way we do about it?
Yeah.
Because we understand it, but that doesn't explain the emotion.
No.
We understand that it's just molecules and friction and temperature and all that bullshit. I was bad at science. But
Yeah, English majors.
a part of the reason I was bad at science is because I dislike hearing about it.
Yeah.
At this point, that's what makes me lean more towards things like nihilism and pessimism. It's like, oh, it's not God bowling. It's just a reaction to things.
Yeah.
Like chemicals and atoms and
It's
bullshit.
It's the sound of molecules being displaced.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like,
I wasn't great at science either.
because when you hear it in that sense,
Yeah.
it takes away the idea of intent behind it.
Mm-hmm.
And without intent, life just seems like this completely, what's the word for like unbiased, unfair, just indifferent, like not leaning towards either side. Life just feels like this completely indifferent reaction of things. That's it.
Yeah.
Which, a lot of people believe that to be the case. Even I do on a bad day.
Yeah.
But when you look at it that way, it's not fun. It's not enjoyable to be here. It's just like, oh, I'm just conscious because of a accident, essentially, at some point, like chemical interaction. And everything that happens, there's no meaning to it. It just happens because it happens. It's raining today because it just is raining today. Because, 2 weeks ago there was too much water in the ocean or something. And that's just not enjoyable. I think that's, again, me personally, and this is why it's interesting to me, because this is how I feel, and I love to hear how other people feel about this. But me personally, if I were to think about that and think that way for everything all the time and interpret everything as just a random act of interaction between molecules, I wouldn't want to fucking be here. You know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%.
Like, why?
Yeah.
Because then what's the point of actually challenging yourself or suffering for anything?
Yeah.
If everything's just completely random anyway, then who cares? And that's not a headspace I like to be in.
No.
So I like hearing things as interpretation, even if I don't believe them. Like, do I listen to these stories like, oh, God bowling is lightning? Do I actually believe that? No. But the next time it thunders, instead of thinking, oh, shit, the RNG of this day is pretty bad.
God.
I'm going to think about, oh, remember when Koby told me it was God bowling? Like, oh, shit, that's more interesting. Anyway, back to whatever the fuck I was doing, it's a more enjoyable way to exist.
I wonder sometimes too, like if before art was a necessity in understanding these scary things that we couldn't control. We now understand, if not control, but definitely understand more about the world and the way it works than ever, right?
Yeah.
So the point of art is to now color in the really bleak and boring lines that we are being presented with as you are saying. And I don't want to butcher your point, but that's basically what you're saying.
Yeah, pretty much.
And then but I wonder then, if art evolves with our understanding of the world around us, and so too does it evolve with our understanding of ourselves, I wonder, and I want your thoughts on this too, actually, I wonder where art goes next. Is the next step of art's understanding of itself? Like, what does art mean to the artistic idea? How does art challenge society because of the point we've brought ourselves to? Where is the next, where's the next conflict point, if you understand what I'm saying? What's its next purpose? Or is it just going to be us coloring in the bleak lines forever from now?
Well, I think we're partially in the middle of it now.
Yeah.
And I don't want this conversation to be the rest of the podcast because I'm just sick of talking about it in my own life. But we're in a point where our generation especially, we have all the information we could ever want. We have the internet. We grew up with it. Right now, when I don't understand something, my first instinct is to Google it, and 8 times out of 10, I get an answer. And it's great. I just understand shit. But now we're reaching a point where we have this sort of renaissance of understanding in mental health. Where, okay, for the most part, every time someone needs to know something factual, they know it. If you need something done, you can either figure out how to do it yourself within 5 minutes, or you can pay someone else to do it. That's just the point where we're at. So now a lot of human interest and pursuit is turned back on ourselves, where it's like, okay, we have these feelings, we understand where these things come from. We're not in a point where we need to necessarily, most of us need to like go to the same factory job every day and go fight a war and do all this stuff. We're just, as Americans, as the privileged Americans we are, we've evolved to a point where we have the time to look inwards. So now I think a lot more people are making art with the idea of reflection of self, for good and bad, because now anybody can do it. And we now have AI.
Oh God, yeah. That's another 3-hour podcast.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
That's what I mean when I say I don't want to talk about it forever.
No, 100%.
But we're in this weird pickle now where we have two extreme sides of the same spectrum, the spectrum being human intent. It's my thesis statement for this whole podcast. I actually wrote down the words human intent on a sticky note last night as like preparation for this, and that's all I did. So so I'm really carrying those two words throughout this whole conversation.
I love it. That's a good thesis.
But so we have two extreme opposites of the same spectrum, where you have art that is being made with more intent than ever because we understand ourselves so well, to the point where we pay people to psychoanalyze us and give us ways to change ourselves that we become conscious of. Nowadays, if we're angry, most people know why.
Yeah.
It's because you didn't drink enough water today. It's because you didn't eat right today. It's because you have a problem with confrontation and you're put in a position in life where you have to make a lot of confrontational decisions, and that's why you're pissed off today. You know what I mean? It's not like it was in the 50s where you're just pissed off because you're pissed off. You can go punch something.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
It's just...
Yeah.
So a lot of that is being translated into art, where it's, I know what I'm feeling, I understand where it's coming from, and this is how I express it. Now we have the complete opposite, where you can make something that, at a glance, looks just as good as something that took a lot of effort, but it was made with no intent besides this would be cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
It would be sick if there was a giant golden dragon fighting one of the robots from Pacific Rim, and fucking
it would be. And
Galactus was there in the background or something. Like, I could just type that into a computer right now and I could see it in the style of Vincent van Gogh within 5 minutes.
It would be sick if Marge Simpson was like smoking a joint with Godzilla. That'd be like sick.
Exactly.
No, it's true.
I can do that without talent.
Yep.
Without style.
Yep.
Without any sort of deliberate micro choice. I mean, and anyone can paint that too. Like, they can just think of something cool and just paint it because it's cool.
Yeah.
But you still have to deal with the process of like, okay, how are they going to look? What posture are they going to be in? Why is this the case? What is Marge holding? What kind of expression does Marge have?
How does she feel
what
about
strain
the,
is
how does
in
she
her
feel
joint?
about the weed?
Yeah, exactly. Like, those are all things that have to be made.
Yeah.
But now we're long story short, we're stuck in this position where we have this spectrum now.
Yeah. You can tell that we've spoken about this a whole bunch because I'm just like nodding and like snapping along with what you're saying. But it's like the situation too is I think what people don't understand, and this kind of actually ties back into my idea that creativity is it's something that is a gift in that only some people do something with it, but it is not like smoke and mirror. And I think the thing about, we're not going to talk about AI a bunch because seriously, I could go on a 3-hour rant why I think it is anti-human. It is disgustingly anti-human, and I'm putting this on record so when I post it, you can always know that if and when, knock on wood, God willing, and the creek don't rise, we finally decide AI is anti-humanity, you'll know where I stood on it. Because if you do stuff with AI, I'm at a point that I don't think it's cute or funny anymore. I think it's disrespectful to everything that art was intended for, me personally.
Just wait until the AI Koby podcast comes out.
There's
enough of your voice out there.
Top 10 reasons to shoot myself in the head. But the thing about it is, in addition to the horrifying societal idea of it, like just putting that to the side, actually, not even in addition, right? I think one of the things about art that makes it so personal, but also makes it so human and ties us into that room that we were talking about earlier, right? It's this idea that You had an artistic idea, cool. Lots of people have artistic ideas. You did something with it. You took the action to be like, how do I want this to look? I'm going to write it. What is this person going to say? Well, how does it end? How do we get to the ending? I have A, I have Z. AI is cheating. It's Google searching. You've done a Google image search. You haven't done art. You know what I mean? Because art is something that we observe and we think about and we worship, yes. But it's also something you do. You do art, you know? You do writing, you do camera, you do garage band, you do art, you do playing instruments. They're verbs. You know what I mean? They're not, art isn't an unchangeable proper noun. I typed something into a computer and made capital A art. No, you didn't. You Googled something. I can Google Starry Night. I can't fucking paint it. I'm not a painter. Oh my God, we're not gonna get into it. But I think that does tie a point in. I think action is art. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
It's not enough to think about art. It's action.
Yeah, and we're in an interesting point where generationally we understand ourselves, or at least we think we do, and give it 300 years and everything we know could be wrong.
I hope it is.
But we're at a point where we like to think that we know ourselves better than we ever have, and for better and for worse, you know?
Mm-hmm.
There's also the worry of, like, other people think they know how the human mind works based on their experiences in therapy or behavioral whatever, and they overread into someone else's artwork because of how they're feeling.
Yeah.
You know, I take everything I hear about everything with a grain of salt because you just never know. Any small factor could change it. You know, the way you feel about a movie could wildly vary depending on whether or not you have a stomachache during it.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Like, it could be the best movie you've ever seen, but if you were having, like, cramps in the middle of the theater, then are you going to like it as much as the guy next to you who just took a fucking whole bag of mushrooms right before he walked into the movie theater?
Oh, yeah.
You know?
Oh, yeah.
Like, it's just, no matter how quality or intentionalized, if that's even a word, something is, it just, every single set of eyeballs or ear balls or balls that witnesses it is...
Jesus. It's just like Sleeper Suplex. Yeah, go ahead. It's just turning into a sleeper episode.
Yeah, it's fair. It's the caffeine.
It's got to be.
Everything that experiences it is affected by a million factors that are out of all of our control.
Yeah.
And that's just how it is. And the sooner you accept that, the better.
It's true.
I mean, even when it comes to writing books or photography, even camera, the way I'm feeling when I take a picture is completely different from the way I'm feeling when I edit a picture.
Right.
Anything could have happened in between there. I could have gotten in an argument with someone I loved on the way home from a photo shoot.
Right.
You know, I could have, who knows, passed a test on the way home from a photo shoot. Like, it just, whatever the mood is constantly subject to everything that happens. And it's really weird to pour so much intent into art in that sense, because intent is constantly changing.
Right.
And that's why the idea of putting time into something, I think, is the most valuable reflection of it.
Yeah.
Because, and that's not to say that every single piece of art needs like 10,000 hours in and of itself to be considered good, but investing time into something leaves room open for feelings to change, and the things that stay constant through all those changed feelings are the things that are worth making it in the first place for.
Right. It's true, and I think the idea of AI being something that can make something the same way every time, it just instantly becomes anti-art, right? And it's what you're saying too, in terms of like the intention behind it. And the specificity with which human beings tick is what makes it so ingrained with humanity, right? And again, harkening back to something we spoke about earlier on the podcast even, the thing that separates us from other animals is our depth of emotion. And depth of emotion is tied directly into art, because what is art if not tied in with the emotion you're feeling when you create it, like you're saying, right?
Exactly.
And that's why this evolution, this new thing is so scary.
It's
right?
also just boring.
It's extremely boring.
It's not fun. Yeah, the process of making something is where a lot of your growth comes from. I feel like, I know that sounds cliche, but it's not something that's talked about often. I mean, a lot of people think that, and rightly so, based on how biographies are told and stories are formed. They think that, you know, you go, you live life, you experience a major life experience, and then you go and make the art about it.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's the process of making the art that is what helps you find your voice to begin with. Like, I can't draw for shit. I can't. But I can draw heads and shoulders really well. Like, I can't do bodies, I can't do arms or legs, but I can do heads and shoulders for whatever reason. And just from the bare necessity of, like, okay, I need to draw a person, and I kept restarting because I can't draw, but now I, like, figured out my style of facial features and things that work for me. Bad example, but you know what I mean. It's just like, same with photography. It's, for a while I did not know how to color grade, so I just did a bunch of black and white shit, and then I did so much black and white shit that I got bored with it, so I had to find ways to make the black and white shit cooler. So I started to make it blurry in some places. I started to add things in some places, and then color started to pop in, and then I started to use more color and more color and more color. And then because I started where I started and ended up where I ended up, that's where a style formed. If I just started at the end, then I would just look like everything else because I didn't go through my own journey. You know, we're lucky enough. We don't live in a point of history where we have to, like, fight for shit as much as we do.
Yeah.
So that's where art is. Art is the fight for me. It's what tickles the primal instinct to run out into the woods and fight a saber-toothed tiger. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not nearly as dangerous or as cool, but it's the same concept in my mind. It's like, all right, time to figure out how to sink or swim in some way, and just diving into it without actually knowing what to do is how you learn how to do the thing that you do, you know?
Yeah.
Like, there's master classes and ways of doing everything, but even those all came from someone just doing it one day. So,
all right. So after that sojourn into something completely different, now for something completely different again, we're coming down the home stretch here. I got one more question I want to close out on. I want to thank you again for being here, for being so willing to share your time, your precious time with us, with me.
yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, 100%.
It's lovely.
It is something I so love doing, and I so love doing it with people who are so fun to talk to, who I could just have this we would be having these conversations off air. We pretty much have, right? It's just now it's on file for people who want to go find it. But this is a question that I think we even spoke about a little bit earlier, but I think it's a really good place to close out on. How often do you worry about being notable?
Notable. In any sense?
I guess as a person on a broad level, but as an artist.
Like, notable as in famous, or notable as
however you interpret notable.
Ugh.
Yeah. That's why I wanted to close out on it.
How broad?
However broad you want to make it, honestly. Part of the joy of asking this question is how you're going to interpret it to me, honestly.
Right. I've always, like, watched interviews, typically celebrity interviews, and I'm always like, oh, they answer so fast. Like, it must be so easy.
Oh, they cut that shit. They cut that shit to high heaven.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
But, like,
I've had people reframe and rephrase answers to me over Zoom.
Yeah, and here I am stalling for a question that I'm even struggling to remember the exact wording of. So how
often do you worry about being notable?
How often do I worry about being notable? Constantly. I'm getting better about it now, but I had a phase for a while where I was convinced that if I wasn't known or remembered in some way, that I kind of didn't exist. And that worried me a lot, because it's like, well, why am I here if I don't exist? Why am I going through all this bullshit? Why am I waking up on a rainy day? Why am I eating shit food and working for money and doing all this stuff, going through heartbreak, losing friends, arguments, etc., if I'm just not going to exist one day? So that fueled a certain type of writing and art creation for a while, where it's like, okay, I need to get my voice in there, and I need to make my opinions and my stances and my feelings heard so that I'm immortal, because then they're out there. And then I did that, and I put out a book where I did that, because I was given an opportunity through college to write a little collection of poems with a couple short stories thrown in there, and I did not like it. I loved the opportunity. I want to thank everyone involved in that, in the off chance that they're listening. It's lovely to be able to call yourself the published author at 19 years old. Fucking sweet. Looks great on a resume, trust me. But I have since heavily moved away from that style of writing. I don't like talking about me. I don't like giving my opinions out there. I know it's ironic because I have like 3 different podcasts I'm on, including this one right now. But I don't necessarily enjoy the idea of my everyday feelings and opinions about the world being immortalized, being noted even. I do like my privacy in that area. It's why I gravitate more towards fiction, or in terms of camera, why I gravitate more towards vibe. Like, trying to think of a better word for that, but it's just, I don't like preaching anything. I just don't. Like, again, I'm more about exploring. If I'm creating something, it's because we're playing with it. It's Play-Doh, and I just molded it into this thing, and I'm giving it to you to either keep it as is or mold it into your own thing. I'm not going to build something and then be like, look at this is the best, and this is this because it's this, and I say it's this, and I feel this way about it. I'm just not interested in that. I'm not interested in making my trauma known to the world, making my happiness known to the world. Like, I understand that nobody cares about that stuff, and it also feels better for me if nobody cares about that stuff. I'm able to deal with life's hardships a lot better if I know that I'm the one dealing with them, and I don't have a million people who also know what I'm going through. You know what I mean? I did go through that phase, especially when that first poetry book came out, because all that poetry was very inward focusing, where like suddenly the people that read it knew me. They knew I struggled with things like depression, hypochondria, paranoia, that sort of stuff. And they're all great, wonderful people, but it's also human nature to, like, once you have a label to attach to somebody, it's really hard to break that off. You almost have to prove to them that you're not that way. And yeah, it felt a little therapeutic to get that off my chest, but now I'm viewed that way. And that's just, some people can absolutely live with that, and it's even more therapeutic for them. For me, it just doesn't work that way. So in terms of being notable, I want my effort to be notable. I want my creations and my voice to be something that people appreciate and to an extent pays me to live, because I enjoy doing it, and I would like to make money for things I enjoy doing, ideally. Time wasted and all that. But I don't necessarily care about me personally, my mental gymnastics being notable. It's just part of life. It's just what I deal with. People don't, the same way people don't need to hear about what I had for breakfast this morning, people don't need to hear about what I'm crying over tonight.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's a great place to end it when it comes to talking about you as an artist. So, George, I want to thank you so much for sitting down again. It really is so joyous to get to do this with people that I find fascinating, that I get to just lob questions at, and they're not afraid to just take swings at them and stuff. And it's cool. And I'm really glad that you did this. So thank you so much for showing up today.
Hey. That's what I do.
It's what he does.
I show up.
He shows. All right. Thank you so much for tuning into another episode of the tentatively titled and hopefully permanently titled session.
This is great.
I have been.
I'm cutting you off because I realized I didn't thank you yet, but thank you.
You're welcome.
This is awesome.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much, George.
All right, continue your outro.
I have been Koby Hirschut. I have really appreciated it. If you've listened this far, say goodbye, George.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.